Coming up on Cannabis Coast to Coast News with Elena Pinto this week, industry reaction to last week's New York Times editorial proclaiming a national problem with cannabis.
The editorial board was replaced in 2025, almost completely. Only one person remained on there. One of the guys is a prior alcohol industry executive. One of them has deep ties to the pharmaceutical industry.
GOP Congressman Andy Harris from Maryland is fast becoming industry enemy number one after saying the DOJ should just take their time, like 30 years, to reschedule cannabis. Plus, the Massachusetts ballot initiative to shut down the adult use market has local dispensary owners ready to bury their differences and rally together to fight for survival.
We live in a confusing time in the world where, you know, on one front, we have a group trying to eradicate adult use in Massachusetts. And then on the flip side, we have the mayor of the second largest city in all of New England saying, look at the great work you're doing.
That's Alex Mazin, Bud's Good CEO of Worcester, Mass., who received the key to the city for their outstanding impact on the community with jobs and educational outreach. And all the prohibitionist threats to the life of the industry hasn't hurt business at all. The country sold more cannabis in 2025 than ever before, up 10% year over year. And do you have an edible story? Perhaps something regular consumers would like to forget, that uncomfortable high caused by the delayed reactions with edibles. Now, the reverse edible is ready to go to market in Massachusetts with no cannabinoids. It's called Soft Landing.
Whereas an edible will get you high, and we have a special formulation that counteracts the psychoactive effects of THC, so it doesn't overconsume. You can kind of dial it back.
All that and more with our state reports, and we check in on Europe. And Cannabis Coast to Coast News with Elena Pinto is next.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Cannabis Coast to Coast News, WPCMTV's weekly roundup of the fight to end cannabis prohibition in the United States and around the world. I'm Elena Pinto. Last week, we shared the story of a New York Times editorial that was fueled by prohibitionists and filled with misinformation, titled, "It's Time for America to Admit It Has a Marijuana Problem." This editorial showed us how far the industry has to go before the movement is strong enough to fight off a return to the failed war on drugs. The thoughts and opinions of this group of editors exposes the fact that despite the gains of the 24 legal states and another 16 who have decriminalized it with medical programs, there is still a long way to go. We ask, what will come first, or if at all? Will it be normalization and acceptance, or legalization with politicians and lawyers? Case in point is a news note out of Congress by the second most clueless prohibitionist in our government, Maryland Congressman Andy Harris, who is urging the DOJ to delay rescheduling efforts for 25 years. As you can imagine, the industry response is total condemnation of the Times piece. MJBiz Daily had a guest column from an industry veteran, Leaf Lee, posted a stinging rebuke, and we had a one-on-one special interview from Jason Ambrosino, a licensee and veteran from New York State. Executive producer Jimmy Young asks Jason to comment on how both sides of this debate can spin the same research to fit their own agenda.
If you don't know how to read a study and go back and demand to see the citations, then how do you know that the study was even sound? We have this huge dependence on these metadata studies now. It's metadata, and we don't even know where the data came from. Perfect example is the 2.75 million American figure that they pulled in. That wasn't a confirmed incidence account. We're talking about CHS here. Yep. For anybody wondering, right? Like they put this number. Yep. Right. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that's cannabis use disorder. Yes.
Yeah, cannabis use disorder. Well, it's cannabis hyperemesis syndrome,
right.
Which is often it's very interesting. It's a buzzword quite often, but the amount of times it has actually happened is absolutely minuscule, you know. And it's funny that we focus in on something like that when we're watching pharmaceutical commercials on our televisions that are telling us 2 minutes of how this stuff's going to kill us.
Right.
And oh, it only happened to 3% of the tested population, so I guess it doesn't matter. Really, if that was cannabis,
Right.
really?
Right.
But we're not allowed to have those kinds of side effects. The worst side effect we've been able to find is cannabis hyperemesis syndrome, which means when you stop taking it, you no longer have the problem. And oh, by the way, you don't have physical dependency on cannabis. That was another issue with the article that the New York Times put out. You know, we want to talk about dependence and addiction, but you don't want to make the difference between a psychological addiction and a physical addiction. Those are vastly different things. The editorial board was replaced in 2025, almost completely. Only one person remained on there. One of the guys is a prior alcohol industry executive. One of them has deep ties to the pharmaceutical industry. There was somebody on LinkedIn. I read their article today. Somebody referenced it. I got to find it for you because they cited, just like I did, you know, everything. I hope maybe I influenced them, cited everything in there. But they looked at this from the angle of who are these people and what are their backgrounds that wrote this? And it was kind of startling to see. Well, it wasn't startling at all. I knew it was going to show. But what we're looking at is people who have an agenda.
You can see both parts of that full interview on demand with Jason and Jimmy on our YouTube channel or on the homepage of WPCMTV.com. The next reaction comes from NORML's Deputy Director, Paul Armentano. He penned a letter to the editor of the New York Times, which, to their credit, the Times published this past week. NORML's Deputy Director, Paul Armentano, writes, quote, "The New York Times has a pot problem. In a recent commentary, the Times editor's opinion that states have rushed to legalize the substance without adequately regulating it. However, state marijuana markets are already highly regulated, and many of options proposed by the Times editors are either redundant or would inadvertently strengthen the illicit market. Cannabis re-legalization is a work in progress, but it's here to stay, and by and large, it's a process we're getting right," unquote. A Leafly columnist, Morgan Ronsengale, asks, WTF is the New York Times problem? And then says, quote, "A sloppy piece of journalism that uses deceptive framing and fraught language to fearmonger around some legitimate issues that have come in the wake of widespread legalization. It's a straight-up distortion, and it is sadly indicative of a broader cultural backlash that those who oppose cannabis legalization have tried to bring about for years," unquote. MJBiz Daily brought in a guest columnist named Chris Fonts, who is the CEO of an infused beverage company called High Spirits. His quote, "Those of us who have built businesses inside the existing state-regulated system know the challenges are not hypothetical, but the prescription offered by the Times, higher taxes and heavier regulation, not only misdiagnoses the disease, but would make the problems worse. The path forward is accountable access, strong standards, real enforcement, transparent education, and tax policy that supports rather than undermines the legal market. Public health policy should reduce harm, not drive consumers into unregulated markets," unquote. All of these responses reflect the frustration over the increase in prohibitionist rhetoric over the past year when the rescheduling movement was halted by the DEA. Of course, it also files in the face of President Trump, who has made it clear that this plant has medicinal qualities that need to continue to be researched and not vilified. No matter how hard the prohibitionist movement tries to shut down adult use in legal states, sales are growing and operators have Mother Nature to thank for that. We produce this show out of Massachusetts, where we are dealing with the second major snowstorm of the season. As much as 18 inches has fallen in the Bay State over the past 24 hours, but cannabis operators love it since pre-storm sales have been brisk. Basically, when people flock to the market for batteries and water, well, now they're adding a stop to the dispensary to prepare to ride out the storm. Sales are up 10% nationwide in January, where they reached the $2.2 billion market in 1 month. Amazingly, the daily sales figures in the days before the storm set up the industry to break the single-day sales record. So, storm prep beats 420, the usual biggest day of the year in sales. One state that has been patiently waiting for 5 years for their medical program to graduate to adult use is Virginia. Former prohibitionist Governor Glenn Youngkin vetoed 2 adult use bills while in office, but now new Governor Abigail Spanberger is on record saying she will sign the adult use bill when it reaches her desk. When that happens, and it could be this year, it will make Virginia the 25th adult use state in the United States. That's a milestone, since that means half of the 50 states are legal for adult use. No one in Virginia is more anxious for that day to happen than our own Joe Parsons. This week, he pays tribute to one of his heroes, the late Reverend Jesse Jackson, who passed away this week. Here's Joe.
I'm Joe Parsons from Higher Education's Coffee Talk, sponsored by 97.5 3WV, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. When the subject of cannabis activists comes up in discussion, people tend to gravitate to Brownie May, Howard Marks, and Keith Strout. But for many activists such as myself, there was another cannabis champion that was pivotal to the progress that we've made in reform. That man was the Reverend Jesse L. Jackson. On February 17th, we sadly lost this great civil rights warrior at the age of 84. He passed away at his home in Chicago, surrounded by his family, after losing his battle with progressive supranuclear palsy, or PSP. He was born on October 8, 1941 in Greenville, South Carolina. He received his bachelor's from North Carolina A&T, where he was an athlete and developed a passion for activism at a very young age. He was a protege of both Martin Luther King Jr. and James Bevel during the Civil Rights Movement. His dedication and lifelong devotion to human equality helped him to become one of the most prominent civil rights leaders of the late 20th and early 21st centuries. He formed Operation Push in late 1971 and the Rainbow Coalition in 1984. He ran 2 fairly successful presidential campaign bids, one in 1984 and again in 1988. Ultimately, he lost the nominations to Walter Mondale and Michael Dukakis, respectively. However, his courage and influence opened many doors for other Black Americans in politics. From 1991 to 1997, he also served as shallow delegate and shadow senator for the District of Columbia. Now, early in his career, the Reverend Jesse Jackson was not as vocal publicly as other activists on the subject of cannabis. This was due to the stigma that had already existed around the plant medicine for so long. But starting in the 80s, as the results of the war on drugs was becoming realized, he became more vocal towards the fact and argued that Black and brown people were way more disproportionately targeted by law enforcement and received larger incarceration times than whites with the same charges. Reverend Jackson framed support for cannabis as a matter of civil rights and economic justice. Later in his career, he not only supported legalization, but decriminalization as well. He was a large component for the minority ownership in the cannabis industry and fair licensing procedures. Simply put, he was more than just a civil rights leader to people like myself. He was a fighter, not only for Black and brown rights, but for the rights of all human beings. He was one of my heroes, and always will be. Now, I was not as fortunate as my producer and founder of WPCMTV, Jimmy Young, to have met him and have worked with him. However, I'll always work to free the plant because of his example of human compassion and justice for all. Virginia has passed its cannabis resentencing bill and will hopefully be signing that into law soon. If not for the work and leadership of activists like Jesse Jackson, that bill would have probably never have come to fruition. Well, that's going to do it for this week from Higher Education's Coffee Talk, sponsored by 97.5 3WV in Charlottesville, and reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Joe Parsons. Until next time, stay lifted.
2 quick notes from New York State. Law enforcement continues to target the illicit operations in the Empire State. And this past week, they busted one shop for over $220 million of flour. In the meantime, legislators in that state are moving forward with allowing THC-infused beverages to be sold in liquor stores. Now let's check in with Tina Tasaka, who covers the Southwest states of Nevada and Arizona.
I'm Tina Tasaka with Iconic Representation in Cannabis X America, and this is the Southwest Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. An Arizona lawmaker has introduced Senate Bill 1725, sponsored by J.D. Mesnard, that would make it a crime if neighbors can smell excessive marijuana smoke coming from your home. The bill expands the definition of criminal and public nuisance, presuming strong marijuana odor can endanger health or interfere with a neighbor's enjoyment of their property. Creating smoke deemed offensive to the senses would be a Class 3 misdemeanor. It would also allow the Attorney General, local prosecutors, homeowners associations, or affected neighbors to take legal action to stop the activity. While supporters say it gives communities a way to address properties, critics argue it could impact legal marijuana use, raising fresh debate over private property rights versus neighborhood protections. It's META time for another top-notch networking event with the Marijuana Industry Trade Association, META's USA's February Cannabis Networking Night, happening February 25th from 6 to 9 p.m. at Wasted Grain, Scottsdale. They're bringing together a strong mix of brands across retail, products, media, and community, all in one room for real conversations and real business. In Nevada, Las Vegas is welcoming a high-profile cannabis launch rooted in leadership and execution. At the center is Priscilla Vilches, founder and CEO of Premium Produce and one of Nevada's most established cannabis operators. Known as the Queen of the Desert, Vilches was among the first licensed female minority cannabis operators in Los Angeles County and the youngest individual to secure a Nevada cannabis license. Her career has been defined by regulatory wins, operational scale, and discipline growth. Now she leads the Nevada rollout of Friday Kush, developed in partnership with Ice Cube, along with celebrity brands including Lil' Kim's Aphrodisiac, Lil Wayne's GKUA, and Immortal by Hulk Hogan and Ric Flair. That's it for the Southwest highlights. I'm Tina Tasaka with Iconic Representation and Cannabis X America for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
When the Farm Bill passed Congress in 2018, it created a so-called loophole that allowed savvy farmers and manufacturers an opportunity to create a legal crop of cannabis sativa. Testing that crop with a limit of 0.3% of THC in dry weight caused an unregulated industry that, when the cannabinoids were extracted, allowed for them to be infused in beverages, tinctures, flour, and many other cannabinoid-based products. Then Congress asked for the DEA for guidance on regulations and rules, and they have done nothing in 8 years. Now there is a new farm bill that has been drafted, and it is ready to be inspected by the U.S. House Agriculture Committee, led by Glenn Thompson, a Republican out of Pennsylvania. Congress admitted they made a mistake with that Farm Bill of 2018 because they thought by limiting the intoxicating cannabinoid THC, they would actually turn this product into an industrial-only product. This new bill makes a clear distinction between the industrial uses of the plant and the infusion of products with or without THC. This new bill is 805 pages long and will be revised when it is presented to that agricultural committee. Now, let's check in with Michigan's Amy Carter from the Michigan Weedsters.
I'm Amy Carter with Michigan Weedsters, and here is your Michigan report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. The Cannabis Regulatory Agency is hosting its next statewide municipal summit to keep communication open with local officials. The meeting will be held virtually on Zoom March 11th, 2026 from 10 a.m. to 11:30. CRA staff from legal, licensing, and enforcement will be available along with time for question and answer. Municipal officials can RSVP and submit questions on the CRA's website by March 4th. The state is also raising concerns about pressure on cannabis testing labs. Officials say that pressure is leading to inconsistent results and, in some cases, contaminated products slipping through. To protect consumers, the CRA has built and staffed a state reference lab to act as a neutral referee when test results conflict. However, the lab still needs clear legal authority to handle and test cannabis. The issue has already been discussed in Lansing committee hearings and remains under legislative review. In local news, the village of Pinckney is getting closer to its first cannabis dispensary. Local officials are holding a special meeting this week to announce which applicant has been selected for a retail license. And finally, Frankenmuth Credit Union is rolling out a new closed-loop payment system for Michigan cannabis businesses. It gives customers a cashless way to pay without surprise fees. Retailers looking for cannabis-friendly banking options may want to check out Frankenmuth Credit Union. That is it for this week. I am Amy Carter with Michigan Weedsters for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
While Virginia is getting ready for their expansion into adult use sales in the Cavalier State, the state of West Virginia is a different story. They do have a medical program, but the Republican-controlled state legislature has always been against moving to adult use sales. Now, 2 Democrats, a party with a true minority in that state house, are introducing legislation to legalize the sale of adult use of cannabis. It will be a tough sell in that state despite being surrounded by all legal states. The first state to legalize cannabis in the United States is the state of Washington, where they continue to make tweaks to their longstanding laws. Here's Matthew Friedlander with our Washington State report this week.
Hi, I'm Matthew Friedlander with Skagit Organics, coming to you with the Washington State Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast. So most of the cannabis news here out of Washington right now is centered around legislation and open rulemaking on the regulatory side. We are about halfway through our legislative session here in Washington. It was a short session this year, so it was only about 60 days, I believe. There's a few bills, cannabis bills, that are still left alive, but notably, home grow has again failed to make it through, and our cannabis consumption or cannabis hospitality legislation is also dead. What is still moving is our version of Ryan's Law, and I believe this was legislation that was passed out of California first, and it's making its way around different states at the moment. But here it's looking like this is going to get through. This would allow compassionate use of cannabis medicine in a hospital setting. So if someone is in a hospital for hospice or end-of-life care, this would allow them to still have access to the cannabis medicine that they were using before they had to transition from the home into the hospital. There is also a cannabis bill that would allow for cooperatives among producers. This would just give a little bit of leverage for any producers that want to form a cooperative and work together to get their product to market. So that's what I've got for you this week out of Washington State. My name is Matthew, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
That'll do it for the A block of this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast news. Up next is our international segment with Dave Barton in Europe and Debbie Facey in Canada. Plus, in the B block, we'll share a story about a homegrown cannabis owner in Worcester, Massachusetts from Bud's Goods. His name is Alex Mason, and he received the key to his hometown city of Worcester for their outreach work in the community. This Cannabis Coast to Coast news continues after this.
You know, jokingly, I ask, what does that key get me? But I think it's just recognition and awareness. And my first thought was really like, this isn't my key. It's the key for my people who work at Buds and all the work they do.
Your cannabis business could be overpaying by hundreds of thousands of dollars in federal income taxes because of one simple assumption that you're making about your accountant. A dispensary owner in Colorado called me frustrated as hell. He'd been working with the same accountant for 3 years. His accountant said, "What's 471C?" Here's what the ignorance of that accountant was costing this business owner: $180,000 every single year for 3 years. 471C has been around since 2017. We're talking about an 8-year-old tax provision that many cannabis CPAs don't fully understand. 471C is one of the most complex and highly debated tax strategies in the cannabis industry. If you want to make sure you're not leaving any money on the table, I'm offering free 471C reviews this month. Link in the description.
Counting Buds has grown into Buds Group, the same award-winning quality, now with more service offerings. Buds Group, your best buds in the biz.
Looking for PR that over-delivers on expectations? At Maverick Public Relations, they pair big agency experience with personalized attention. From launching award-winning brands to securing top-tier media hits, their data-driven communications team helps visionary leaders and entrepreneurs rise above the media noise. Maverick PR is responsive, collaborative, and relentless about results and ROI. Visit themaverickpr.com and make headlines together.
If you want to make history, if you want to be part of history, if you want to say you helped legalize marijuana in America, now is the time to join us.
Welcome back to Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Elena Pinto. As we turn to our international segment, we start in Poland, a country that has an active medical program. According to Prohibition Partners data, the country of Poland saw a 12% growth year over year. Like many nascent markets, there is price compression. The totals of dried flower dispersed by Polish pharmacies in 2025 was 5,450 kilograms. And before you whip out your calculator, that is over 12,000 pounds of weed. Here's the catch, though. Prices are getting lower and have declined by 19% over the year. So just like what happens in the United States, operators are moving more product for less money, and that decline or price per gram is down 19% from 2024. Now let's check in on the rest of Europe with Dave Barton and Debbie Facey in Canada.
I'm Dave Barton from Thermador with your International Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. This week across Europe, cannabis policy and practice continued their slow and sometimes contradictory march towards normalization. In France, the spotlight fell on Cannabis Europe at Paris, where officials briefed industry leaders on the country's long-awaited medical cannabis reimbursement framework. Full details are expected next week, a moment many see as decisive in determining whether France finally moves beyond pilot projects and into a functional national system. In the United Kingdom, a medical cannabis patient has won a 2-year legal battle after a Crown Court overturned a wrongful driving conviction, a case that underlines how far enforcement and judicial understanding still lag behind the law. At the same time, Bristol Medical School announced the country's first student teaching placement in medical cannabis, suggesting the next generation of clinicians may be better prepared than the system they're entering. In Germany, consolidation and caution went hand in hand. Canadian producer Organogram revealed plans to acquire Sanity Group, a strong vote of confidence in Europe's largest medical market. But at the same time, legal experts are warning that proposed changes to Germany's Med-Can-G law could clash with EU requirements, potentially reopening debates around telemedicine and patient access. Elsewhere, the contrast couldn't be sharper. In Finland, lawmakers decisively rejected a citizen-led cannabis legalization proposal, while in the Netherlands, Amsterdam is once again considering banning tourists from cannabis cafes, a reminder that Europe's tolerance has always come with footnotes. That's all for this week. I'm Dave Barton from Thermador with your International Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
This is Debbie Facey with the Canadian Coast to Coast Cannabis News Report. So what I have in Canada this week to share with everybody is kind of like the dominating aspect that Canada's had on the cannabis industry here. Canada has emerged as a global cannabis superpower since legalization in 2018, gaining its first mover advantage that helped building federally regulated supply chains and the high-tech cultivation that we have when it comes to creating and supplying our industry. It is a unified nation framework that is allowing the legal network of the exports of medical cannabis to Europe, Australia, and the edge of the US, which is great because this just means that we are kind of doing the right thing, even though we are still in the breakthrough point, I would say. This is also including Latin America and, like I said, some of the edges of the US. The industry contributes to billions of the GDP, supports thousands of jobs, and is generating taxes, revenue for the public programs, while pharmaceutical grade cannabis is meeting the strict international standards. Through facing the challenges that we have and the price composition and the price restructuring, Canada's reputation, our reputation, I should say, sorry, when it comes to quality and compliance, is making a benchmark for the safety overall when it comes to creating your own cannabis laws and regulation. So I'm going to give you a rundown, a little like yippee, but also just a little tidbit about how we as Canadians have been able to conquer this cannabis journey. This is Debbie Facey with the Canadian Coast to Coast Cannabis News Report. Peace.
On past shows, we've explained the history of how the green rush in capital into the cannabis has been slowed by the green wall in this country. Investors are being more cautious, with the future being so unknown regarding hemp and the proposed rescheduling movement. Debt service is due for a number of companies this year, and Curaleaf announced it has closed on a $500 million private placement. Our man who is always high on Wall Street is Doug Miller, who takes a look at the impact on Curaleaf's market performance. Here's Doug.
I'm Doug Miller from High on Wall Street with this week's Cannabis Stock Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. MSO Curaleaf Holdings has officially closed a $500 million private placement of 11.5% senior secured notes due February 18th, 2029, pushing out its debt maturity by 3 years. The proceeds will refinance $475 million in notes that were due in December 2026, while also covering transaction costs and supporting global expansion initiatives. The new debt was issued at face value, pays interest semi-annually, and is non-dilutive, meaning no shareholder dilution, which is key win for investors. Chairman and CEO Boris Jordan called it the largest bond deal ever completed in the marijuana sector, signaling institutional appetite is still alive, even at double-digit rates. The agreement also allows for future note issuances subject to leverage requirements and other financial conditions, along with up to $100 million in additional senior banking financing, giving Curaleaf greater financial flexibility through 2029. So let's see how the stock chart looks. Curaleaf's trading around $2.35, and it's just bouncing around in this volatile market. So we have to wait for some good news, and also we have to wait for this geopolitical volatility to calm down. And when that happens, the cannabis stocks can get set up and they can start to run. So watch for dips, trade smart, and lock in those profits. And that's this week's Cannabis Stock Report. Reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News, I'm Doug Miller.
2 weeks ago, the governor of Oklahoma, Kevin Stitt, announced during his State of the State address that he would like to shut down the entire medical market in his state. Needless to say, that was not a popular policy change. When it first opened, the state was practically giving away licenses and issued over 7,300 medical licenses and 1,800 licenses for dispensaries. This was a little too much too soon to have that many licenses awarded with no control. And now their current governor wants to shut it all down. Interestingly enough, Republicans and Democrats in that state house have said the governor lacks the authority to shut it down, and they want to protect the existing laws. With more from her home state of Oklahoma, here's Kimmy Cannabis.
I am Kimmy Cannabis from Can I Talk About It with your Oklahoma Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. First up, a new proposal is moving through the Capitol. Representative Ryan Eves has advanced House Bill 3314, which would give counties the option to impose up to a 15% public service impact tax on retail marijuana sales. This does not automatically create a tax. counties would have to put it before voters in a special election, and a majority would have to approve it. If passed locally, the revenue would go into county general funds to support sheriff's offices, police and fire departments, and to address dilapidated properties. HB 3314 passed committees 6-0 and now heads to government oversight. Next, lawmakers are considering tighter regulations on medical marijuana edibles in 2026. Senator Paul Rosino has filed Senate Bill 1591, proposing a 10 milligram THC cap per serving and 100 milligrams per package. However, many Oklahoma patients are already pushing back, saying low dosage caps don't reflect real-world medical needs. They argue that serving size is not one size fits all, and that experienced patients managing chronic conditions often require higher dosages, meaning tighter caps could lead to higher cost and more product consumption just to reach therapeutic levels. And here's an insider compliance tip for cannabis business owners. Make sure the lettering on your exterior signage is at least 2 inches. OMMA inspectors have reportedly been measuring signs and issuing infractions for lettering as small as 1 3/4 inches. That 1/4 inch could cost you. That's it from Oklahoma. I am Kimmy Cannabis. Peace, love, and all that good stuff.
I'm Christina Brisson with your weekly Ohio Cannabis Report with Cannabis Coast to Coast News. So I want to touch base on a few things this week that are kind of interestingly going on. So Ohio recently changed its mold testing. And I haven't really looked into this before. I saw this change today, so it's really interesting to see the comparison with Michigan. So Ohio was recently capped at what they say 10,000 CFUs, which is colony forming units. I did not know what that meant until I looked it up earlier today. So, but in comparison to Michigan, they allow 10,000 for medical, but 100,000 for recreational use. So that's how much more mold they let us recreational users intake. So Ohio has now changed theirs from 10,000 to 50,000. So that's going to be an interesting change. And I say this is going to hopefully lower costs because of stringent testing. It resulted in a lot of product being thrown away here in the state of Ohio. Now back to SB 56. I keep talking about this referendum and Ohioans for cannabis choice. I've tried to reach out to them, but I've not had much luck getting in touch with them. I have checked out their website, and the only thing I see right now is about Greene County having a place for you to sign up. However, I can say there's a place here at 3313 North High Street that is a shop here. I'm not going to try to advertise names. However, that does have the petition there for you to sign. Now remember, this is not just about intoxicating hemp anymore. This bill also now recriminalizes cannabis when you buy it from any place that is not a dispensary or you buy it across state lines. So I encourage you to check it out. Check out their website. I think it's nosb56.com. Look up the information yourself, see what you can see. That is your weekly Ohio Cannabis Report. I am Christina Brisson with Over the Top Renovations with Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
There's been another attack on the THC-infused hemp industry. In the state of Missouri, the House passed a total ban on THC-infused hemp products in the state. So what impact will that have on the licensed market? Let's ask Brandon Jones, our correspondent in the Show Me State.
Hey everybody, it's Brandon Jones with B Green Distribution with Missouri Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. And we have some pretty big news here in the state of Missouri. So the House has passed a bill here that would ban some more cannabinoids not being sold inside dispensaries. So we know there's lots of companies here and all over the country that are using the 2018 Farm Bill to sell hemp products, anything less than 0.3% THC, and selling lots of drinks, vapes, edibles, all these things outside of Missouri licensed dispensaries. Well, this bill would now change and cut down on the products that are allowed to be sold outside of the dispensary by putting a cap, a little lower cap than already existing, and changing the total number of amounts of milligrams of THC to be allowed inside certain items such as drinks. Some states like Iowa have already kind of taken this into where they've capped the number of limits of milligrams you can have of the THC in each individual drink. But it does still have to go to the Senate and to see if it will pass there as well. So it is not into law yet, and if it does pass, it would not go into effect until November, and then we'd have to talk about a whole other topic of how they would actually enforce that. So big things may be happening here in the state of Missouri, but lots of fun still events happening in the cannabis world. Obviously, this stems from a lot of the licensed manufacturers wanting to make sure that other people in Missouri can't go to other places to get their cannabis. So we'll see if this bill passes, but as we are now, it is one step closer to getting passed into law here in the state of Missouri. So I'm Brandon Jones with B Green Distribution with the Missouri Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. How to stay medicated and educated.
I'm Tina Tasaka, and this is the Tribal Nations Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Nebraska has become the first state with a voter-approved medical marijuana program to be left out of the long-standing federal protections that shield state legal operators from U.S. Department of Justice prosecution. Since 2015, a congressional budget rider known as the Rohrabacher Farr Amendment has barred federal funds from being used to interfere with state medical cannabis programs. 47 states are included in the latest spending bill signed by Donald Trump, but Nebraska is not included. Nebraska voters legalized medical cannabis in 2024, yet the program still hasn't launched. Strict limits, including a 1,250 plant cap per cultivator, licensing delays, and the lack of a seed-to-sale tracking system, have stalled rollout. Patients will not have access to flower or edibles once sales begin. Questions are now swirling in Washington. None of Nebraska's congressional delegation has taken responsibility for the omission. A spokesperson for U.S. Senator Pete Ricketts, a former governor who has long opposed cannabis legalization, declined to clarify whether he played a role. Without the rider's protection, future Nebraska operators could face federal prosecution, creating serious uncertainty for the state's emerging industry. That's the latest in Tribal Nations Cannabis. I'm Tina Tasaka for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
The state of Alabama is still trying to get their medical program launched years after it was passed. Right in the middle of this rollout is our own Jennifer Boozer Stewart, who continues to wave the pro-cannabis flag in her state. Here's her report this week and a preview of her Monday night show, Sweet Home Alabama.
I'm Jennifer Boozer Stewart, reporting from Alabama for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Alabama now has 10 medical cannabis physicians certified to qualify patients, but we still have no idea when they will take appointments. The state's newly licensed dispensaries have not announced any potential dates they will be open to service the qualified patients, which means the sick and suffering are still in the dark about when they can hope to receive their long-awaited access to medicine. There is talk that qualifying will require patients prove that they have done everything possible and available through conventional medicine before these doctors will recommend them, regardless of current testing or proof of their condition. We also have no word about when they will announce the who, where, or when medical cards will be obtained once patients are approved. Citizens are reporting to the Alabama Cannabis Coalition that when they call these doctors, the receptionist will not make an appointment for people on Medicare, Medicaid, or without insurance. They don't seem to understand that no one's insurance will cover the visit, and the medical cannabis patients will all be cashed either way. The Alabama Medical Cannabis Commission has been slow to offer more information for patients who have been waiting over 4 years to get the help they need since the medical cannabis bill was passed in 2021. Tonight on Sweet Home Cannabama Radio, I have South Carolina State Representative Greg Ford on as a guest. He was a hemp farmer, processor, and retailer after CBD stopped his son's seizures and saved his life. He is truly a unicorn in the government. No other state has a hemp farmer for a legislator. He is diligently educating the South Carolina House of Representatives and causing those legislators to reconsider a hemp ban bill in favor of proper regulation. He got elected just 50 days ago and by a mere 21 votes. Join us on FM Talk 106.5 or on the Sweet Home Cannabama YouTube page at 7 p.m. Central tonight, live. Reporting from Alabama, I'm Jennifer Boozer Stewart for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
Since 2013. now talks about a ballot initiative funded by prohibitionists to shut down the existing $8 billion industry is headed to the ballot. There is national significance to this movement. If the SAM-backed campaign to shut it down is successful, it will empower the prohibitionist movement and continue to erode democracy, plus cause thousands to lose their jobs and businesses folding even more than they are now. Alex Mazin is the CEO of Bud's Goods of Worcester, and he understands the magnitude of this ballot question and the challenges to defeat it at the ballot box.
When you first heard about the ballot initiative to shut down adult use in the Bay State, what was your reaction?
No way. Can't be. Not possible. Like, there's just no probability. And as we peeled back the layers of the onion and we saw the initiative and the signature being collected, today I perceive it as being the largest existential threat to the cannabis industry, not just in Massachusetts, but across the entire nation.
Mazin, a Worcester native, was given the key to the city of Worcester this week for the community outreach of Bud's Goods and the educational programs they have initiated in that city. For a native of the second largest city in New England, this honor was special for Alex, who recognizes the importance of normalization now that cannabis has been legal in the Bay State since 2016.
We live in a confusing time in the world where, on one front, we have a group trying to eradicate adult use in Massachusetts. And then on the flip side, we have the mayor of the second largest city in all of New England saying, look at the great work you're doing. So it's a little confusing, but also humbling, and makes me realize that, cannabis is not just a business. It is a movement in addition to being a business. And so you can't have that movement without being a profitable business and without being a good operator. But it is far more than just running a successful business. And we've always been sort of the underdog or the bad guy. And from the day I remember starting all of this, it was, we don't want this in our community, to thank you for being in our community, right? And so that was kind of what went through my mind as I was being told that I was receiving the key to the city of Worcester.
Congratulations to Alex Mazin and the entire Bud's Goods team. Next up is Curtis Emery with the Bay State Report.
I'm Curtis Emery, a bud tender from Resonate in Worcester, Massachusetts, with the Bay State Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Massachusetts has an oversupply problem when it comes to the cannabis industry. Unregulated canopy growth, unregulated new business license have led its way to a problem where we are seeing price compression across the state. And a way to try to fix this and helping businesses which are suffering from price compression, the CCC is hoping to put a freeze on new licenses within the state until the canopy and oversight problem is handled and we can move forward on a better foot. The CCC is planning to open up this new plan for public opinion with a public hearing set for the future. They're hoping to gather some public input to understand what the public might think about such a move. Also in the news, Shannon O'Brien has essentially put out a plea for researchers in an attempt to make Massachusetts a research hub for cannabis industry. The CCC has, as they always have, made available research licenses to allow companies to do research on cannabis in the state in hopes to gather more information to help make the industry a little bit more safer and make sure that we know as much as we possibly can about the plant and how it affects the human body. Basically, O'Brien is hoping that companies that entities will take up the call, grab a research license, and do some good work for the state, hoping to make sure that mass cannabis is one of the most informed cannabis industries in the country. I've been Curtis Emery with the Bay State Report, Cannabis Coast to Coast News. And for even more Bay State headlines this week, I will send it over to executive producer Jimmy Young for some more mass cannabis news.
I'm Jimmy Young on location at Native Sun in Hudson, Massachusetts, one of the very few dispensaries that is bringing a new product to the market. It's called Soft Landing. And I can admit I'm one of the people on earth who has actually used this product because I needed a soft landing because I know you're going to be shocked about this, Eli. I did get a little too high one night. Okay, and the sad thing is I was all alone. Anyway, Alice, tell me a little bit about this product and how it all came to be.
Sure. Okay, so Soft Landing is the world's first reverse edible. So it counteracts just the psychoactive effects of cannabis. So if you are using plant medicine, it will not interfere with that effect at all. If you find that you've just overdone it a little bit, now you can dial it back. If you are perfectly high and you get a text and you realize, oh, I need to be a little bit more focused now, you could have some Soft Landing chocolates and come down easy.
In about 15 minutes. 15 minutes.
Yeah, well, it starts to work right away.
I definitely felt it right away, but in 15 minutes, I went from uncomfortable to comfortable.
Absolutely.
And here's the genius behind it, right? Am I right?
He made the Soft Landing you had.
I love that, and I loved being your guinea pig, by the way.
Of course. Thanks for doing it.
Absolutely. So when I talk about this product, they all go, oh, yo, what's made up of? And I said, well, there are no cannabinoids in it. That, perhaps, to me, is the most amazing thing, the concoction, and I'm guessing it's intellectual property. You have the recipe, right?
That is correct. Both of those things are correct. It is intellectual, and I do have the recipe. So it is naturally occurring. So all ingredients are on the FDA's generally recognized as safe list. So there's really no limit to where it can be sold, and that's huge because those regulated substances, those have a big impact to business. So we can be sold anywhere. We're all natural, and we work quickly. And those are probably the big three right there.
No question about it. And I got to tell you, one of the stories that we cover on a regular basis is in new states where the commercial media has to cover everything having to do with cannabis that will bring down the industry. So emergency rooms go up because edible products have delayed reactions, okay? And everybody who's understood and learned about this product has an edible story. Okay, David Ortiz would not tell me his, but I've been after him since he came out of the closet, as it were, the cannabis closet. How important is having a product like this in the home of anybody who uses or enjoys edibles? I mean, to me, I've told you this, it should be in the hands of every first responder.
I completely agree. And, the story that you're mentioning, when you show up in the emergency room, they don't have anything for you. Right. They just tell you to wait it out. Eli likes to say, when people say, do you have a competitor? Eli says, time. That's our competitor. So we think this should be available, first of all, in every convenience store. I like to think, a group of people all take a bunch of edibles. One of them doesn't feel anything, so they take that second one. Or third. And an hour later, right? An hour later, 3 of them want to go to the convenience store to get munchies, and one of them really wants to make it stop. Well, when we're on that shelf, there'll be something for everyone.
In the meantime, we're going to go back to Cannabis Coast to Coast News with Elena Pinto.
Well, that'll do it for this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Elena Pinto. Remember, it's a whole new world of weed out there. Use it and consume it responsibly. We will see you next week.
So what's your life story? Do you define yourself by your career or by your personal journey? The trick is to tell it in under 15 seconds. Here's mine. I'm Jimmy Young, a 30-year Emmy Award-winning sportscaster from New England who's a teacher and coach in my soul. I've mentored hundreds of young people, but I'm most proud of my only child, a 35-year-old son, Gabriel, who's now a licensed electrician in North Carolina who can fix anything. How about you? If you want to build your confidence enough to walk up to a stranger at a networking event and start a conversation, sign up for my office hours with Professor Jimmy live on Monday nights from 8 to 9 p.m. Now, there's a fee of $1 to hang out with me for that hour, but I'll share some tips so you can tell your life story in 15 seconds. Just log on to ProfessorJimmy.com, and guess what? I'll even give you your $1 back if you don't laugh and learn something that can help you become a better communicator.